a 2-day, in-person, public event that from now on features only lesbian activist presenters. The chairs, the videographer are all lesbian. At this point in time, this feels really unusual, and my heart just about breaks with gratitude that we can actually do this weekend. In Brisbane in July '94, a 3-day National Lesbian Conference was held as part of the week-long Lesbian Festival. That festival included art exhibition, picnics, an Indigenous lesbian event, dyke divas for opera dykes, local talent nights, singing up women, spoken word events, women's circus, films, theatre, dance party, jazz nights, sports, and lots of women singers and bands.
Sounds fun.
However, the 3-day lesbian conference was disrupted during the first 2 days when males claiming to be lesbians were excluded on day 2 after very heated debates amongst the participants. One conference delegate said, "I've been to lots of lesbian conferences and I've never been confronted by a man. I came here for a safe lesbian space. I'm tired of being made to feel guilty for not including other oppressed groups. We are an oppressed group. We have the right to a lesbian space." 1994. One of the organisers said, "But how can anybody define what a lesbian is? Just ask us. Why would a man dress up as a woman to try and infiltrate our ranks? Why would you go around saying you were a lesbian if you weren't?" One of the expelled males said, "I always knew I was a girl. I have only ever slept with women. I don't like men at all. And I'm definitely a feminist." That caused the ending of a publicly advertised lesbian cultural festival and conference in Australia, and highlights the length of time we have been facing and how we have been divided over this issue. That was last century. Yeah. Thank you everyone for coming to this exciting and very innovative event in the current climate. I'm very grateful to Anna, who happily, as you've noticed, refers to herself as a non-lesbian. And I'm very grateful that she invited me to work with her on it. And it's incredibly heartening to see all the other women, when we lesbians, both very young and old, are under attack on so many fronts, especially like never before from the rainbow mob. By meeting in person and respecting and acknowledging the significance of the struggles of lesbians to protect same-sex spaces since the 1980s, we've been at it, lesbian lives is such a rare and unusual part of resistance to gender ideology, and it's a contribution to sisterhood. Our lives. We are non-conforming just by being lesbian, because the world's built and functions on the basis of heterosexuality. Living as a lesbian, there's almost no escape from the heterosexual world, which other women take for granted and rarely question. We live the lives of resistance to heterosexuality. If you are not a lesbian, have you ever been asked, are you with a man because you really hate women? Are you heterosexual because you haven't found the right woman yet? How old were you when you decided you were heterosexual? The broad range of issues and perspectives around sexuality being covered this weekend, and with all the time we have for discussion, means that some people may find yourself disagreeing with some of the ideas or even feeling confronted. Great. Hopefully that'll lead to some terrific discussions and give an even more meaning and life to the phrase that Lavender has used for her paper. The personal is political and the political is personal. Just like other women, lesbians have diverse party politics. Some voted for Scott Morrison. Some voted for the Greens. Some even support Trump. And just like other women, some belong to faith organisations. Just like other women, lesbians have a diversity of hairstyles, clothing, occupations and recreational interests. But at the same time, lesbians are oppressed as same-sex attracted in a heterosexist society, where to ignore and exclude males is often considered not normal, to say the least. Something in need of explanation in ways that heterosexuality is not. The two sex-based oppressions of being female and same-sex attracted and their interaction in our everyday lives means we have long been sensitised to the lack of rights, the loss of rights, and this has brought with it theories and understanding, and the women who do theorise about why we are a more common target of abuse and attack and why we are being sidelined and ignored by governments. Second wave feminists, lesbian feminists like myself and many others here were aware of the damaging effects on our lives and rights in the 1980s. Janice Raymond, in 1979, a lesbian, published the first book highlighting the problems for women of transsexuality. You'll hear the word lesbophobia quite a bit this weekend. This term describes specific hostilities. It's not like having a spider phobia. It describes the hostility, discrimination and negativity towards lesbians arising from those two sex-based realities of our lives. It's a crucial concept and has been with lesbian feminists since 1974. It's still widely used in Europe and by the European Parliament. However, the Rainbow Mob in Australia do not acknowledge the specific discrimination against lesbians, despite adding increasing numbers of new phobias to the lists: transphobia, biphobia, homophobia, intersex phobia and recently acephobia. Lesbophobia is missing from all government and Rainbow corporations' glossaries of terms. This means governments, media and all organisations are silent about the discrimination specific to lesbians. Oh, and as you know, there's no L in Ida Hobbit. We are both lesbian and feminist, so whilst being emotionally and sexually attracted to women, we centre and prioritise women in much of our lives outside of the bedroom. We created and keep on creating a distinctive culture in which we do not just survive, but thrive and live joyfully. And you will be hearing more of that this weekend. It's a culture that is very, very different to that of gay men. When considering a holiday, heterosexual women don't consider how many offensive, sexist conversations, jokes or behaviours may be made by lesbians. And that they might have to endure those at every meal or during every activity on their holiday. Lesbians do consider the behaviour of men when considering a whole range of holiday choices in their lives. The nature of heterosexual environments is the reason Olivia Travel operates lesbian women-only cruises and holidays to places like Antarctica, Galapagos, even New Zealand. There are women here today, like me, put up your hand, others who smile when they remember the peace, the pleasure and the freedom of spending a fortnight on a ship with anywhere between 100 and 1,000 lesbians. In terms of visibility, we have moved a long way from our second wave to now. There are a few mainstream celebs who are very visible, like Ellen DeGeneres, Hannah Gadsby and Martina Navratilova. But this is a relatively recent change. And a few lesbian celebs are lesbian feminists. However, Martina does stand with lesbian feminists and other women in opposing males in women's sport. In fact, sport is where we are sometimes quite visible to the general public. And it's where we often found each other if we were new to town. Softball teams were a great place to start as a newbie in town. I played cricket. 75% of the cricket team I played with and at representative level were lesbian. In fact, We were so numerous that a heterosexual woman who was dropped from the Australian team launched an anti-discrimination act on the grounds that she was heterosexual and the team was lesbian. Sport's one of the few places where females of all ages can compete, play and enjoy the company of their own kind. It's the one area where the majority of the non-feminist public, including politicians, can understand the importance of same-sex spaces and the unfairness of males in women's and girls' sport. Women's soccer teams at the recent World Cup had a record number of out lesbian players across the teams from many countries. Of the 22 women in the Australian Matildas squad, 11 were out lesbians, the most of any national team.
That's more than 10%.
Indeed it is. All have followings on social media in the thousands, these young women, lesbian women. 11.5 million Australians watched the Matildas play in England. This was the highest viewership of any program ever recorded since the current rating system started in 2001. Because of Australia's great performance shown on free-to-air TV, lots of girls and boys and adults are now running around with soccer shirts on that have the name Kerr, Razzo, Vine, Corey on the back. All of them lesbians. And because many are true fans, they know and want to know lots more about their favourite players, including if she has a girlfriend and not a boyfriend. And they follow their relationships closely on social media. Sam Kerr, the captain of the Australian team, has 1.8 million followers on Instagram. There are plenty of photos of her with her girlfriend, an American soccer player. That is lesbian visibility, but it's a rare pocket. Sam says, "I love to share my relationship on social media. So I think if we can change the way 1 or 2 people feel about themselves, they can look at us and see that we're happy and we're trying to be as successful as we can." What this game-changing, lesbian-heavy women's sporting event means for our campaigns to keep women's spaces female is unclear, but I think there are opportunities. Another flicker of visibility was this year's King's Day Honours, when a lesbian feminist from Victoria received an Order of Australian Medal. Annika Deutsch was that person. How many newspapers covered this rare occurrence? A lesbian feminist? And talking about her activism of particularly housing specifically for lesbians, she did not mention the word queer or LGBTIQA plus people anywhere. In terms of our activism, to live as an out lesbian is a political act of resistance in itself. For many lesbians, so-called coming out doesn't happen once in your life. It can be a daily, a weekly, monthly decision depending on your circumstances. To speak out and campaign politically as a known lesbian on any issues, Indigenous rights, human rights, climate change, war, peace, security, social security, that all comes with increased personal and political risks, including the risk of being ignored and perceived as having a negative effect on the public acceptance of that campaign. Lesbians know the depth of lesbophobia. Lesbian feminists have been active around the traditional issues associated with women and children, such as domestic violence. It was a lesbian who threw the brick through the wall, the window at Elsie's place to set up the first domestic violence centre in Sydney. As you can see by those here today, many lesbians have persisted in their activism. There are quite a few of us silver-haired ones, and this was why it's so heartening to have the gift of this 2-day conference from Anna. The scope of activism for lesbian feminists includes lesbian-specific issues, of course, but it's as broad as other women. Some are involved in direct action, like picketing or legal challenges, like Lesbian Action Group. Some strengthen and build community by organising in-person greetings or community art projects like the Soup Collective in Tasmania. Some lobby government, some write songs, some write poetry and novels, some research, some publish our history. Some work daily in jobs that support women and children, and some follow the path widened by feminist lesbians like Adrienne Rich, Janice Raymond, Mary Daly and Audre Lorde. And this weekend we get to enjoy the company of all of you. I want to finish by saying just a little about why we've all ended up here and why I, for one, am very excited about the weekend. In 2006, a group of human rights activists, lawyers and some UN personnel met in a town called Yogyakarta in Indonesia. Over 80% of that group were male, mostly gay, and they developed a document about the rights of LGBT people. They wanted all countries to adopt these rights. One of the aims of that document was the removal of any reference to sex in all legislation and policy. The document is the Yogyakarta Principles, named after the town. It was launched at the Human Rights Commission and at the Human Rights Council in Geneva in 2007. It demanded that the rights based on gender identity, and it never considered that there might be a conflict of rights with those rights of women. In fact, women's rights were never discussed. Today, only 28 countries usually sign up to their principles or their media releases, and unfortunately Australia is one of them. It never has been, nor will it be ratified by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and it has no standing in international law. Despite that, in 2011, the Labor Party National Conference passed a motion to adopt the Yogyakarta Principles as Labor Party policy. Then, just 2 years later, as part of implementing that policy, amendments were made to the 1984 Sex Discrimination Act that had protected women's rights. The definition of sex had to be loose so that trans women could be included as women, plus gender identity was added as a protected characteristic. Since 2013, the Yogyakarta Principles have been adopted as the basis of all human rights commissions in Australia, a situation that Lesbian Action Group and Carol is challenging at the moment in Victoria, and Sal Grover is facing here in Queensland. There was a submission by an autonomous lesbian group back then in 2013 highlighting that on this issue, lesbians are the canary in the mine of Australian society. When human rights start to disappear, ours are some of the first to go. Their submission was a huge red flag that was ignored, but it was waved on behalf of all women when they argued against the inclusion of gender identity in the new Sex Discrimination Act. They warned, and I quote, "The issue of gender identity recognition is urgent and not only erodes lesbians' rights, but the rights of all women. Both the idea of gender and any talk of gender identity hide the hatred of lesbians and all women and born raised female. The inclusion of the category gender identity is undesirable unless it is able to provide equal protection for all identities and does not privilege one identity over another, thus inadvertently providing a context where the rights of one group violate the rights of the other." And here we are today with our sisters. So despite some flashes and pockets of visibility, we lesbians have a vast social and political life, an activist history which is mostly unseen, unacknowledged, but for this weekend there are many reasons to celebrate this mostly unseen and unacknowledged history. It's a rare and wonderful opportunity to share with all of our sisters, to learn, strengthen our resolve and experience the power of sisterhood. So welcome to Brisbane, sisters, and here come the lesbians.